Okay, so I want to, today I want to cover with you, I want to go back over some closing problems. We kind of did that last week, and I'd like to work through a closing problem for you just to, make sure that you kind of understand um, the whole closing scenario. You are going to see some problems on the exam regarding closings. Last week, I might be able to go back and pull that up. I kind of, I kind of went through this scenario last week where we went through some various items that would be on the closing statement. And so let's just take a look at a few. Let's kind of go back over that. And then what I'd like to do is I'd like to work through just a little sample closing problem with you and help you understand how to do that. So again, um, used to years ago, uh, you had to do an actual whole closing problem. Today they kind of break them up into, I think, mini closing problems. But you are going to have a lot of items that you need to know, such as the sales price. You're going to have things like earnest money. We're going to have a loan payoff. And this would be for the sellers. You'll have what's called accrued interest, and we're going to work through that today. And don't let any of this scare you, because it's really, the other thing you're going to have is a new loan. And then they will also have some prepaid interest. And then you have taxes. I give you some problems with prorated homeowners insurance, but they're kind of getting away from some of those questions, but it's still good to know. You could have a rent proration. And of course, you could have other prepaid items that could be involved as well. So let me just kind of go through some of these again with you. Each side will have debits and credits. And if you're a seller or a buyer, you're going to have debits and credits. So they may have some questions that just really want to know, how is the sales price shown on the closing statement? That could be a potential test question for covering this. Well, if you are a seller, that is, and I'm going to change my pen color here, that's going to be a credit to the seller, and it would be a debit to the buyer. Remember, I have these buyers and sellers. So just think in terms, if you were buying a home for $100,000, that's going to be a debit or a charge to you. And if you're buying my home and you're giving me $100,000, then I'm going to get a credit. Now, what about earnest money? Earnest money is going to show up as a credit to the buyer. Normally, when you go out, by the way, which I think is very cool, I heard from one of my students, I've heard from a couple of students lately, but I heard from one today who sent me an email. When I sent the emails out to everyone, he wrote me and said, hey, I'm still on the list, but I passed my test 4 weeks ago. And he said, believe it or not, I've already sold a home and closed on it. And he said, I got a new listing for pretty high dollar new listing. So that's always cool. So you're going to do the same thing. Okay. But when you go out to write a contract with a buyer, normally we like to get earnest money. Now, why do we want to get earnest money? Well, several reasons. Number one, more importantly, it shows that you are sincere about trying to buy this home. Generally, and especially with today and the internet, today when we put in the MLS that our listing is under contract or pending, that also notifies Zillow, the other agents in the MLS. They're going to see it's pending. They don't want to show it. I mean, pretty much a lot of the activity is going to just shut down on that property. So, we want to make sure that a person's serious about this when they're making a contract on our listing. So they're going to give you some earnest money, and you're going to generally either have them deposit that with your broker, and depending on what state you are in, remember, every state's a little different. Your broker needs to deposit that earnest money within so many banking days. Most every state says you, as a salesperson, have to turn the earnest money over immediately. Okay. Now, here's a test question they love. And I'm kind of getting into some state material, but I want to throw things out for you. Anything can be earnest money. Okay. So I've seen them have exam questions that say a buyer wanted to give a diamond ring or a boat. Can you accept that as earnest money? If everyone agrees to it, yes. If you saw a question that said the buyer wanted to give a promissory note, could that be earnest money, a promissory note? If the seller and buyers, if everybody agrees, yes. Could you have no earnest money? Absolutely. But in this example, you want your buyer to put some earnest money down. And so that is going to be a credit to the buyer only. I think I said last week, I was reading one of the questions, and I had to take the exam when I got my school approved in Oklahoma. And I'm getting ready to take the exam again, which is good for you guys for Utah, because we're getting the school approved in Utah. So some states make me go take the test to get my instructor's license. It doesn't bother me at all, because I want to see what's on the exam, to make sure that I'm covering all of those topics for you. But when I took the test in Oklahoma, there's a question, when it popped up, I thought, holy cow. And I'm reading, and they have a sales price, and they have taxes, and they have the loan amount and the interest rate and the street address. And like, I'm going through this, and it's telling me who's paying what. And I was like, this is frightening. There was so much stuff. I knew I could get through it, but it was just like, it's going to take a while. And then I get to the very bottom of that question, and it said, how does the earnest money show on the closing statement? I'm like, really? They gave me all of that junk and the problem, and you just want to know how the earnest money shows on the closing statement? Well, it's a credit to the buyer. Okay. Now, why is it a credit to the buyer? Because the buyer's giving you a down payment. Basically, that's what earnest money is. It's a good faith trust funds that we want to buy this home. And so if I give you $1,000 as earnest money, when we go to the closing table and you've got me paying $100,000 for the home, I'm going to say, no, wait a minute, though, I gave you $1,000. Don't I get credit for that? And so absolutely. So that's why it's just a credit to the seller. Now, I don't think they would ask this, but you have to read the questions very carefully. If it said the buyer gave the earnest money to the seller and the seller deposited it, then you would be a debit to the seller. But I don't think you'll see that. Okay. Generally, earnest money is always going to be a credit to the seller. Now, we have the loan payoff, and that's to the sellers, right? So this is the seller has a loan, that's going to be a debit, as well as accrued interest will be a debit to the seller. Now, I just want to make sure everybody understands how interest works. I just made my mortgage payment it was due on July 14th. That's the date our payments due. I made the payment. on the 14th, actually made it on the 13th, but I mean, it was due, it was for the 14th. I actually was paying from June 14th to July 14th. Now, again, if you haven't gotten to this part in the class, it's okay. Just take good notes, and because that way when you get there, it'll make sense. And I am recording this, and so it's going live to YouTube. You can go back out to YouTube and watch that right now. So, so your mortgage payment's a lot like staying in a hotel. You check in the hotel, even though you give them the credit card, they don't really settle up your bill until you check out of the hotel. Same thing with your mortgage payment. So my payments due on the 14th. If we were closing on our house today on the 16th, then there's what? There's 2 days of interest that I owe. See that? And it's really easy. Don't let this get, we'll walk through one of these here in just a minute, but there's 2 days of interest that I owe the lender. And so this 2 days of interest is what we call this accrued interest. So you're always going to have your payoff, which is a debit, and you're always going to have your interest, accrued interest, which is a debit. In fact, let's just work through one of these right now so you have that. And I just realized my calculator. Let me see here. I have a different calculator I like to use. It's right over here. Let's just walk through one of these real quick. So the way you'll probably see this on the exam is they will say the payoff. Let me use a different color pen. I meant to. So they're going to say in your problem, you're going to be reading, they're going to say the John and Mary Smith own a home at 1405 Elm Street in Poplar Bluff, Missouri. I mean, whatever the city is, they like to throw a bunch of stuff in the problems. And the payoff for July 1st is $109,402. Okay, and 57 cents. And you're closing on August. They're closing on their property on August the 5th. So you're going to have to figure out what's the payoff for August 5th. And it's not that challenging. So they're going to say they have a 6% interest rate. It's a, a 30-year note. And they're going to give you a payment that is $712.14. That's principal and interest. Okay, principal and interest payment. So what's the payoff? What's the what's the amount owed to the lender on August 5th? Now, don't let this scare you, because it's just multiplying, adding, subtracting. So the first thing we're going to do, remember, interest is paid in arrears. So the first thing we want to do is we want to work a T problem, and I'm going to draw this down here in the bottom. And if you haven't watched the math video on my T problems, a lot of schools teach this. We put a little T here, and we put a multiplication sign there and a division sign here. And we have 3 parts to the T problem. We have part, we have total, and we have percent. Now, I like to look at these as This is the smaller number, this is the bigger number, and this is the rate percent. We know that. So if we're looking up here, where would $109,000 go? It's the bigger number. So we're going to put 109,402.57 right there, the bottom. Now, do we know the smaller number? No, we're going to solve for that. Do we know the percentage? Yes, it's 6%. Now, I always like to move my decimal place over 2 places. So we're going to convert that to 0.06. I know some people will say, well, John, how did you know $109,402 went on the bottom? Well, I know that because number one, it looks like a big number, right? So it's, you know, I'm going to put that down there because what we're solving for here, remember, this is the loan amount. This is the interest rate on the note. We're solving for how much is the annual interest on this note. Now, I just threw some numbers out, so I hope this works good with everything I have. But so I'm going to, if we look at this, if you have the two bottom numbers, it tells you to multiply. So 109,402.57 times, we're multiplying 0.06 equals 6,564.15. And again, this is annual interest. That's how much interest you would pay in a year on that amount. Now, in the problem, they give us the principal and interest, which is $712.14. Again, this is principal and interest, and this is the monthly principal and interest payment. So if we know what the annual interest is, if we divide that by 12, we should get the monthly interest, right? We know the annual interest, so we divide by 12, we know the monthly interest. So when I divide this by 12, it gives me $547.01. And that is your monthly interest. So if I subtract 547, so I'm going to put $712.14, that's monthly principal and interest, subtract 547.01, I get $165.13, and that's the principal part of the payment. Everybody with me there? So just to walk back through you, and I know that's a lot of stuff on my iPad, and I apologize, hopefully you can read it. We took the loan amount up here, right up here, and we multiplied that times the interest rate, 0.06. I just like to, I like that personally, Red. Sometimes I see students who will try to use a percentage key on their calculator. It does some weird stuff. And anyway, just get in the habit of moving it over 2 places and adding a 0. When we multiply that, that gives us our yearly interest on that amount. Now we divide that by 12, we get the monthly interest. We already know in the problem what the principal and interest is. So when we subtract our monthly interest from the mortgage payment, we get the amount left over is how much would go to principal. Okay. So this then, let's go over here. The balance July 1st was how much? 109,402.57. 402.57, I think. 109, 402.57. And the amount that went to principal was 165.13. That was the principal we paid. Now, again, remember, we're making this payment on August 1st, right? Because that was the balance on July 1st. So now we subtract, we take 109, 402.57, and we subtract how much went to our principal payment, which gives us 109, 57 minus 165.13. And that gives us a balance of 109, 237.44. So this will be the payoff for August 1st. That's our new payoff for August 1st. Well, the problem said we're closing on August the 5th. So we need to figure out 5 days of interest. So the way we do that is just another T problem. 109 to 37.44. And remember, it was 6% interest. We know we multiply. That gives me, we're solving for our annual interest, which is 6,554.25. And the way I would do this is divide by 12, which is 546.19. That's monthly. And then I would just divide by 30. They'll always give you, and so that's $18.21. And if we're closing on the 5th, we have 5 days of interest, so times 5, so $91.03. $109,402.57. So the payoff will be 109,493.60. And I'm just going to double check that. Subtract 91.03, 109,402.57. So that's the answer. Now, let's just kind of back up and go through this. Always take your loan amount, multiply it times the interest rate on the loan. That's going to give you your annual interest. Divide that by 12. That gives you monthly interest. And then subtract your monthly interest from your monthly principal and interest payment, and you will get the principal amount for that month. They like to make you go a couple of months deep, okay? That's a possible math question. And again, it's just a bunch of T problems, and you'll work through some of those, and you'll get in the habit of that. Now, they could, hopefully they won't, they could say something like this. The payment is 819, well, let me see, is 1,819.36, which includes principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. Don't freak out, because they're going to give you the taxes, $1,200 a year, and they may give you the insurance as $1,200 a year. All you have to do is divide those by 12, right? And so you would just subtract $200 And now you know what the principal and interest payment is. And this will be the number you'll work everything off of. I've seen them do that before. So one of the things about this exam, and that's why I say you have to read the questions a couple, 3 times. They love to just throw little things in there. It's the wording that can trip you up. I mean, they could say that the taxes are $1,200 semi-annually, which means what? That's twice. You're going to take 1,200 times 2, and the taxes are 2,400 a year. So really kind of pick through there and pick up on those little words. They love to do those kinds of questions. There's a question, and I have it in. I know it's in the Missouri state portion. I need to add that to the other states as well. But they have a question that says 2 brokers decide to share their commission equally. They mention the broker's name and says the one broker sold the home. What percentage of the commission does the selling broker get? Now they have in the question, they decide to share their commission equally. Jones has a property listed for this amount. He has a 6% commission. And you read through all of this information. Now, it says what percentage of the commission did the selling broker get? They decided to share it equally. Well, one of the answers is 3%. Everybody wants to take that because you read through it and you say, well, if the listing broker had a 6% commission and they were going to share it equally, then he would get 3%. But the correct answer is 50%, because when you read the question very carefully, it says, what percentage of the commission does the selling broker get? Well, they get half, you know. So you've got to really read those questions carefully. And just like that, they know that schools find out about that. And all they have to do is flip that 1 word or 2 words, and that could go back to meaning 3%. You know, what percentage of the sales price does the listing broker get? That flips the whole answer to that. So now it's 3%, right? So just read those questions very carefully. Any questions? Let me and you can unmute yourself and ask a question or raise your hand, and because I want to make sure you understand. You know, sometimes I go over this so much and I forget that maybe I missed something. It's a great group too. I'm excited we have so many people on the call for 4 o'clock. I hope this time works okay for you. I am recording it. So, okay. So we're going to go back over here to our, problem. So I think hopefully you understand how to figure that. Sometimes they may just want to know, how does that show in the closing problem? Sometimes they may want you to actually tell them what's the payoff. So you're gonna have to work that down a little bit. Now, the new loan is going to be a credit for, it's going to be a credit for the buyer, and prepaid interest will be a credit for the buyer. So let's go back to this problem here. If we were closing on August the 5th, what they're going to have the buyer do is, or we could go back to this problem. Remember, I paid my payment on the 14th. We're closing on the 16th. I, as a seller, owe 2 days of interest. However, if you're a buyer in this example, you're going to have interest from the 16th to the 30th. Now, even though there's 30, they'll always tell you figure a 30-day month, or so just keep that in mind. So in this case, if they're getting a loan for $100,000, you're going to have to figure out, and you take the interest rate, and you're going to have to figure out what's the daily interest and figure out how many days there are between the closing date and the end of the month. And again, they'll give you figure a 30-day month. And so if there's 15 days or 14 days, and they'll also tell you, count the day of closing. But if there's 15 days or 14 days, whatever you calculate out, then you're going to have to figure out how much interest is that. And so there could be prepaid interest. And in this case, it would be a debit to the buyer because they're paying interest in advance. And so in this situation, they're paying interest on the 16th of July through the end of the month. So their first payment will not be due until September the 1st. Because remember, we always pay interest in arrears. So since they just do that at the closing table, they just collect the interest for the remainder of the month from the buyer, and then the buyer's monthly mortgage payment's not due until the following month. So if I'm closing on the 16th, I'm paying my interest through the end of July, but my payment won't be due until September. But remember, when I make September's payment, I'm actually paying for the previous month, paying for August. Does that make sense? So again, the new loan would be a credit to the buyer, but the interest they have to pay would be a debit, would be a charge. And then taxes, we talk about that, excuse me here. Taxes is kind of a whole different breed, okay? It's kind of like real estate taxes are kind of like your mortgage payment. And so when you pay taxes on December the 31st, so it's January 1 here, and it's December 31 here. When you make your taxes at the end of the year, you're actually paying for the previous year. So when we make pay our taxes in December 31st, 2020, I'm actually paying for the year of 2020. The dog's barking upstairs. So if you close on July the 16th, if we close today on a property, the seller lived in that home from January 1st until July 16th. And so the seller is going to owe for that part of the year, and the buyer picks up and goes the rest of the year. The way they do that at the closing is they just charge the seller. I'm just going to throw some numbers out here, okay? So we're going to charge the seller $1,000. That's the amount of taxes that were prorated and owed between January 1st and July 16th. So that's going to be a debit to the seller, and we're going to credit the seller for $1,000. Okay? Then on December 31st, let's just say the total tax bill is $2,020. The buyer is going to have to pay the entire tax bill on wouldn't be 2020, it'd probably be 1800 or something, but maybe it would be more than that. Anyway, whatever it is, the buyer is going to pay the entire tax bill. And sometimes I'll have buyers that will, and we tell them this at closing, and I'll have buyers call me or come in the office and they'll say, how come I have to pay the entire tax bill? You know, I didn't own it the whole year. And I have to get the closing statement out and show them, I know that, but remember on the day of closing, we gave you credit. We charged the seller from the time they owned it, January 1st to July 16th. We charged them for that, and we gave you a credit on the closing statement. Had we not done that, you would have had to have brought another $1,000 to the closing table. And then they see it and they say, oh, I understand. I get it now. So again, you know, it's a charge to the seller, a debit, credit to the buyer. And generally, you know, I could go back and work that, but if taxes were $2,020 for the year, we would just divide that by 12. So it's 168.33 a month. Divide it by 30 is $5.61 a day. So in this case, we have, my mom always told me to start in February, March, April, May, June, July. We have 6 months. And we have 16 days. So 561 times 16 equals 89.78, and 168.33 times 6 equals $1,009.98. And when we add those together, is 1,099.76. That should have been this should have been a debit for 1,099.76, and this would have been a credit. And then at the end of the year, the buyer makes the whole payment. That's a I mean, you're going to probably see that on the exam. So any questions on that? I want to make sure that I'm not jumping over. So taxes, again, that's going to be a debit to the seller, credit to the buyer. Now, rent proration, which you could see, it's totally different. When you pay rent, you're paying forward in advance. So if you're renting, when you make your rent, if you make your payment on the first of the month, you're actually paying for the month of July. So in this example, if our rent, I could go. So if our rent was, let's say, $750 a month, and you paid it on July 1st, and we're closing on the 16th, and they tell you to figure a 30-day month, because they'll tell you that in your closing problem. Well, in this example, you know, we have a rental property, and so the seller collected the $750 on the 1st, didn't they? And that paid for the full month of July. So $750 divided by 30 equals $25 a day, right? So if we closed on the 16th, there's going to be, and there was a 30-day month, there are 14 days of rent the buyer should get credit for. Sellers already collected it. So I'm just going to take 25 times 14 and get $350. And this is going to be a debit to the seller and a credit to the buyer. Why is it now a debit to the seller? Because remember, rent is paid in advance. And so this 750 that I put in my pocket on the 1st of July was for the whole month of July. Well, if we close on the 16th, I owe you as the buyer 14 days of rent that's still in my pocket. And it's $25 a day, so I just take 14 times 25 and I need to give you that money. So back over here to the rent, that would be a debit to the seller and a credit to the buyer. Now, the other thing that I need to mention here is that anytime you have prepaid items, it's going to be treated, let's just back because it's prepaid. So I'm going to go over here to a new worksheet so we don't have to spend so much time going over. Classic example are association dues, or they may have water or something. If, for example, here in my area, we have a development, we have a lot of developments, but one development's Tier de Lac, and I had an office out there at one time, back when I owned 3 offices. Today, I just have the 1 office, but Tier de Lac, the dues out there were due July 1st. And at that time, I think they were $650. Now, if you paid your dues on July 1st, they were association dues are kind of like prepaid things. It was for 1 year. So if you closed on, if you were a seller and you closed your home on, let's just say October 1st, okay, and you were the seller, you're going to say, wait a minute, I paid my association dues for the whole year. And so what's $650 divided by 12? That's $54.17 per month. Well, if you're closing on October 1st, you have October, November, December, January, February, March, April, May, June. You have 9 months of dues that you ought to get refunded from the buyer. And the buyer needs to pay for those 9 months because they're taking over. So in that example, 5417 times 9 gives us 487.50. And this would be a credit to the seller, and it would be a debit to the buyer. Because remember, the buyer's taking over and they're going to be there those 9 months. I mean, if they sell it, that'd be reprorated. But you as a seller, even though you paid $650 on July 1st, you really were only there July, August, September, 3 months. So you need to pay for your 3 months, but you really need to get credit for the 9 months that you're not going to own that property. So those are the other items. I mean, those are the things you're going to have to prorate and calculate. Everything else, they're going to say the seller's paying for this, the buyer's paying for that. Okay, so it's kind of a no-brainer. So if they say the title insurance is $50 or $500, the inspection's 125, and there's a termite inspection for 50, and the buyer's paying for all of those, you just plug them in there. Now, you will have to calculate what? A sales commission. And I don't have that on here, but the commission, can't forget that, is always going to be a debit to the seller. Okay? So that's pretty much how you go through the closing statement. And I'm seeing them give these in many problems today. They're not so much giving you a full-fledged closing problem, but they could give you, you just never know. They could give you a bunch of stuff and say, how much is the seller going to walk away with at the closing table? And so you got to, you can pull this stuff out and put it together and it'll be fine. And there's lots of questions throughout your material. But I'm seeing more of just mini type problems where they want to know what the tax charge and how's this entry going to look on the closing problem if taxes are this much and you close on this date with a 30-day month. They may want to know what's the seller going to walk away with. Just read the questions, and you might get one of those questions like I saw that just blows your mind away, and it says, how's the earnest money show on the closing statement? Okay, so a couple more things I want to tell you about. I can't say, sometimes sometimes a bird flies through the yard and says, hey, guess what was on the real estate exam? And I did a podcast on this. Again, if you go out, I would encourage you to go out there, check out Podbean. This is right here is the latest one I did, which was 2 new exam questions. And we don't want to do that. But the person said, here are the 2 questions. A buyer is with an agent and they're driving around and they spot a for sale by owner. Can the agent show the buyer the property? And, I'd have to read the whole question and know how it's all worded, but generally in Missouri, you can show it, but you need to get an authorization from the seller, having them sign a one-time showing and or an authorization to show the property, and specifically explaining to them who you're representing. So yes, it's going to be okay. Just make sure that you're picking the answer that says, as long as I get something signed and everybody agrees to it, okay? The seller agrees to it, and that would be fine. The second question was, a buyer and seller get together without an agent and agree on terms to sell, to do a real estate transaction. And they want to go to a broker and hire the broker to close the transaction. Can the broker do this and charge a fee? And the answer is sure. I do that all the time. In fact, I had a closing last week with a buyer on a for sale by owner, and the buyer paid me, my daughter and I paid us our commission. We had a set fee, and they didn't know what to do, and we took care of it. And the for sale by owner did not pay me. Well, the for sale by owner did pay us, but they had a price they wanted, and we put the commission on top of that. So the fee actually did. But yeah, you can work those types of things out. So the answer is, could that happen? Yes. Right before I got on the call, a little guy down in Ellington, Missouri called, and he said, I got a buyer for my farm. He was wanting me to list the property next week. And he said, hey, I got a buyer for my farm. Can you just do the paperwork and I pay you a fee? And the answer is sure. Now I've got to have documents signed, and everybody needs to know who I represent. And so just read those questions. As long as it's nothing illegal, and you're getting paperwork signed saying it's okay, and everybody agrees to it, just like the earnest money question, absolutely, you can do that. So those are two questions that a person, they passed the test, by the way, but they remembered those questions and were just curious how that was on the test. Well, anybody have a question? It's 5 o'clock. Man, that was a quick hour. I don't know where it went, but I did record this. If I heard somebody come on a little late, I did record it. Let me just show you. You go out to my YouTube channel. On YouTube, you'll see right there, it's showing we're going live right now. But that's going to be there, so you can go out. I'll fix it with the topic that we covered. And again, you can listen to all of the podcasts here. I do want to show, because we've got quite a few folks on here, if I could very quickly here. Whoops, I just changed my login today, and I bet that's gonna, I think, well, I'll have to do that later. But I did want to just mention down below, let me see here, I might be able to log in. So I really would like to show this. Oops, I just changed my login today, and it's a little. Let's see here. Let's see if that gets me logged in. It does. So I'll move this over so you can see my screen here. I'm going to hit update password. Okay, so let me go in from the learner view, and now let me share my screen with you so you can see this, because I get this question asked a lot, and it's on my to-do list to update the introductory video. But when you log into your course in your dashboard, if you're Missouri, Oklahoma, wherever you're at, right here, I'm not one of the programmers, but do you see this little arrow here? If you close that, you have additional information down below. And these are the review modules. And if you're through, 10 chapters and you want to go back and review chapter 5, go back into the review modules. You can hit restart, because I think that kind of resets it up better for you. But over here is the menu, and these are unlocked. So if you want to jump all the way down and just do the quiz at the end, you can do that. Or if you want to go back and just go through the flashcards, you can do that. So the review modules are all unlocked. So you can use the menu and jump around anywhere you want to in the review section. So I just wanted to mention that. But I also want you to be aware that this little arrow button right here minimizes. If you go down below, there are links to all of my previous study sessions here. There's a real estate math made easy. These are all of the same questions you have in your course, plus additional questions. So I've had several people recently tell me I just really buried myself in those practice exams, and they were huge to help me pass the test. But I want you to know there are questions in these practice exams that are not in the main course. So you want to do that. And then I try to put, some review for the state material. So I just wanted you to be aware, you don't want to review here. Sometimes I'll have people say, well, I wanted to go back in and review chapter 5. You don't want to do that in the main course, because as you can see, I went back into number 2. It makes you do the entire module over. So once you complete them in the main course, don't go back and review there. Go down and review in the review modules. Now, the last thing I'll say, and I'll open it up if anybody has a question. I have a lot of updates I'm making to the school. A lot of updates. Really fixed a lot of little grammatical things. I'm taking out trying to take some timers off a few slides that, especially some of the videos. You know, one of the problems when you have interactivity with audio and video is that um, and timers and internet connections that can do weird things. So if for some reason, and I'm going to try to do these early in the morning and late at night, if for some reason you're halfway through module 10, which is a long module, or 16 or 11, and you wake up in the morning and you're like, how did I get moved back to the beginning? I'm sending a video out on this as well. It's probably because I made an update, but you do not have to go back through the entire module. Please just send me an email. And then all you have to do, say it was module 10, is just come down here to module 10, just like I showed you in the review, and go over to your menu button. Just click resume or restart.
An implied agency is created when the
and find out where you were in this module and say, oh, I remember this is where I was, latent defects. You can just jump right down there, okay? Then when you finish the review module, you want to go back to the main course, okay? Because you don't get credit for the review modules. But I'm just trying to tell you, if for some reason I start you over, here's what I would recommend. Try to finish a module the night before, just in case I'm doing new uploads. But if it does something weird and you get up early or you're up late at night and you're like, what happened? My module's all messed up. I probably did an update, okay? So any questions, please know I'm always here to help you. I appreciate your business so much. And I hope these are helpful for you, these Zoom study sessions. We'll do another one next week as well. Anybody have a question? Or we had a great group of folks on the call. This was really cool to see so many. So thank you. You're going to do well. You're going to love this business. The market is like red hot. And I tell you what, the indicators from the National Realtors and the Economist, they don't foresee the market really going anywhere in a different direction for a few years. And a lot of that's because there's such a lack of inventory. And so as people are building new properties and new homes, it's been a good market. So I'm excited that you're going to get to participate in this. But reach out to me if you have questions. Thanks for your business. I hope this was helpful, and I will talk to you soon. Have a great day. Bye.